The sun never truly set on the planet of Cathara. Its amber skies glowed perpetually, a constant reminder of an empire that had stretched across star systems for centuries. Towering spires of black metal and crystal rose like jagged teeth from the capital city, Korthal, reflecting the light in eerie, fractal patterns. In the heart of the city stood the throne hall, a colossal structure older than any living memory, and within it sat the Blood Throne, a living construct of alloy and organic circuitry, its surface pulsing faintly as though breathing, waiting for the rightful heir. Generations of Cathara's nobility had attempted the blood trial, a sacred and perilous ritual that tested every conceivable aspect of an heir's worthiness: intellect, combat skill, resilience, and moral judgment. Yet none had survived. Some perished in the trial's labyrinthine chambers, consumed by engineered beasts, traps that shredded flesh, or illusions that broke the mind. Others simply faltered under the pressure, their arrogance or greed their undoing. Over time, whispers had grown into legend. The throne was cursed. It had rejected them all. Within the palace, corridors stretched in endless loops, guarded by sentries whose eyes glimmered with bioluminescent implants. Here, among the shadows, moved Jax, a human janitor. He had arrived on Cathara as part of a labor exchange program from the nearby human colony on the planet Viridia. To the aliens, he was invisible, just another lowly servant meant to sweep floors and empty waste disposal units. Yet Jax was observant. He had a curious mind, fascinated by the intricate patterns of alien architecture and the strange rituals of the nobility. Every whispered conversation, every ceremonial gesture, every mechanical detail he noted meticulously. Jax knew that today was no ordinary day. The next candidate for the blood trial was about to step forward: Prince Varek, heir to the most prestigious lineage in the Empire. Varek had grown up coddled, trained to believe he was destined to succeed where others had failed. His arrogance was palpable. The way he walked through the corridors, dismissing advisors with a flick of his tentacle-like appendages. The court had gathered in the throne hall to witness the ritual, their expressions a mixture of hope, fear, and greed. The blood trial chambers were hidden beneath the throne hall, a sprawling network of corridors, shifting platforms, and lethal mechanisms. Each heir faced a sequence of rooms, each designed to test a different aspect of their being. Some chambers required brute strength. Others demanded mental acuity, empathy, or courage under extreme duress. The throne itself was not merely ceremonial. It monitored every heartbeat, every drop of blood, and every micro-expression, evaluating the candidate in ways even the most learned scholars could not fully comprehend. As the trial began, Varek stepped into the first chamber, the doors sealing behind him with a hiss that echoed through the stone corridors. The chamber morphed instantly, its walls rippling like liquid metal. Gravity shifted sideways, then inverted, challenging even the most experienced acrobat. Mechanical predators designed to anticipate the heir's movements lunged from hidden alcoves. Varek's limbs flailed, he stumbled and fell, barely evading one creature before another pounced. His trained reflexes, honed in controlled duels and simulators, faltered in the unpredictability of the real trial. From his vantage point in a maintenance tunnel, Jax watched quietly. He noticed patterns the court did not: the timing of the predator's attacks, the subtle weaknesses in the shifting platforms, the hints in the chamber's design that suggested predictability amid chaos. To a human, these observations were second nature: pattern recognition, intuition, and a knack for improvisation that Cathara's heirs had never needed to develop. Despite his failures, Varek pressed on, arrogance still burning in his eyes. He attempted to solve the trial's mental puzzles, twisting alien symbols and hieroglyphs into sequences meant to unlock the next chamber. Yet the puzzles were not just about intelligence. They tested creativity, empathy, and the ability to anticipate consequences beyond logic. Varek's mind, trained for tactical thinking and rigid logic, could not cope. He made one fatal miscalculation after another. Finally, in the trial's final room, designed to test moral judgment, Varek faced a holographic simulation of a civilian village under attack by invaders. He had to make a choice: save a small group immediately, or risk greater loss to save a larger population. Varek hesitated, then chose what he believed would maximize personal glory rather than the welfare of others. The simulation collapsed, the floor beneath him opening into a pit of engineered acid. The court gasped. Another heir had failed. Jax, still unseen, felt a strange tension in the air. The throne, which had remained silent for centuries, pulsed faintly, a soft hum that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Its sensors registered something unusual, though none in the court could detect it. The throne had never recognized failure in this way before. It had waited, silently, perhaps impatiently, for someone or something different. As the crowd dispersed, muttering about curses and the impossibility of ever seeing a successful heir, Jax cleaned the chamber quietly. He moved methodically, unaware that every sweep of his mop, every turn of a wrench, and every careful inspection brought him closer to a destiny no human could have imagined. He paused at a panel that controlled the chamber's environmental systems, adjusting a valve. A small slip. His hand caught on a shard of metal. A drop of blood fell, unnoticed at first, onto the polished surface below. The drop glimmered faintly, almost as if alive. The throne responded. A ripple of energy ran through the palace, subtle but undeniable, like a chord struck in a cathedral that no one else could hear. Jax stared at the blood, puzzled by a sudden warmth spreading in his hand. Somewhere deep beneath the throne hall, the blood throne stirred, sensing the pulse of something utterly alien to its sensors. Something human. For centuries, the throne had waited for an heir worthy of its awakening. It had rejected the finest of Cathara's bloodlines, yet now, in the quiet, unnoticed act of a human janitor, it had found potential. And with that, the first ripple of change began. A change that would shake the empire to its core.
The blood trial was designed to break the strongest and the smartest, yet Cathara's nobles had grown arrogant, convinced that each failure of the past was due to incompetence, not the throne's mysterious standards. The new heir, Prince Varek, was no different. Clad in ceremonial armor that glimmered with embedded sensors, he entered the chamber with a mixture of pride and defiance. His attendants whispered reassurances, but Varek ignored them. The trial was his destiny, he believed, and nothing could stop him. The chamber doors closed with a resonant thud, sealing him in. The walls shimmered with a strange energy, morphing as though alive. Gravity tilted sideways, forcing Varek to stumble against the walls. Every surface pulsated underfoot, some solid, some intangible, challenging his perception. From hidden alcoves, mechanical predators leapt and lunged, their movements swift and precise. Each attack tested not only reflexes, but judgment, forcing Varek to make split-second decisions. He faltered. He miscalculated. His inexperience with unpredictability, a human advantage he had never understood, proved fatal to him. His royal training had prepared him for duels and simulated battles, not a chamber designed to punish arrogance and reward ingenuity. A mechanical predator tore through his defenses, and he barely avoided a fatal strike. The court above squirmed, exchanging anxious glances. Another heir had stumbled at the first test, and murmurs of the throne's curse grew louder. Far below, in the maintenance tunnels, Jax moved silently, performing routine checks. He had been observing the trial with a curiosity that bordered on obsession, noting subtle patterns in the chamber's construction. Each predator, each shifting platform, followed a rhythm, a code, a flaw. Jax recognized these weaknesses instinctively, without thinking, a skill honed through years of adapting to unfamiliar tools and environments on Viridia. Humans excelled at improvisation. They thrived where predictability failed. As Varric advanced deeper into the trial, the chamber's challenges intensified. In the second room, walls closed in, forming corridors that twisted like serpents. The temperature swung violently between scorching heat and freezing cold, sensors monitoring his stress levels at every second. The prince's resolve faltered as exhaustion crept in, his mind clouded by fear. The room then morphed into a puzzle, a holographic simulation of the Empire under siege. Varric needed to predict enemy movements, allocate resources, and make morally significant decisions in moments. He failed spectacularly. His decisions were cold, rigid, and self-serving. The holographic simulation collapsed under his choices, triggering a chamber collapse. Varric tumbled, narrowly escaping a pit that opened to release corrosive gas. His panicked eyes darted around, trying to anticipate the next danger. But the trial did not reward anticipation alone. It demanded creativity, adaptability, and moral courage. He had none of these in sufficient measure. From his hidden vantage point, Jax noticed every detail. The patterns in the shifting platforms, the timing of the predator attacks, the subtle inconsistencies in the chamber's logic, all of them could be exploited. Humans, unlike the heirs of Cathara, were unpredictable. They could improvise solutions on the fly, think laterally, and act in ways the trial's designers never imagined. The Janitor had no formal training in combat, ethics, or advanced strategy. Yet instinctively he understood what the heirs could not. The trial tested human qualities alien to Cathara. In the third chamber, the trial became more dangerous. Varric faced life-or-death choices: rescue hostages trapped in collapsing rooms, or save strategic technology critical to the Empire. Each decision carried immediate consequences. His attempts to calculate outcomes using logic failed. The chamber responded dynamically to his intentions, punishing predictability. He panicked, lunged without thought, and made a catastrophic error. A retracting floor panel nearly crushed him. Meanwhile, Jax, unaware that he was about to play a pivotal role, continued his routine maintenance. He adjusted a valve controlling the environmental systems and inadvertently triggered a minor shift in the chamber's configuration. This tiny act, unnoticed by anyone else, introduced an anomaly, an opening in the otherwise perfect sequence of traps. Back in the trial, Varric struggled to navigate the new, unpredictable layout. For the first time, he hesitated, unsure where to step. The mechanical predators adapted instantly, hunting with lethal precision. He stumbled into a corner, trapped, and realized he had underestimated the complexity of the trial. Above the chambers, the court grew restless. Their faces reflected the same disbelief that had haunted generations. No heir could survive this trial. They whispered about omens and curses, about the throne's ancient wisdom, and about the futility of human hope. Little did they know, hope had just entered the palace in the form of an ordinary human janitor. As the final challenge approached, Varric confronted the moral test, the throne's ultimate evaluation. A holographic scenario displayed two options: save a single group of citizens trapped under rubble, or redirect energy to preserve a city's power grid, which could save thousands but risk the lives of the trapped. Varric hesitated, then chose the option that would secure his personal glory. The simulation collapsed catastrophically, sending him tumbling into a pit of engineered acid. He screamed, and the court gasped in horror. Another heir had failed, as predicted. And then something unexpected happened. The throne pulsed faintly. Its sensors, dormant for centuries, registered a new variable, one it had never analyzed before. Somewhere in the maintenance tunnels, Jax's minor injury, a cut on his hand from scraping a shard of metal, sent a drop of human blood onto the floor. The throne responded to the blood's presence, a subtle ripple of energy flowing through its circuits and organic tissue. Jax paused, puzzled by a sudden warmth in his palm. He had no idea that this tiny act had triggered the throne's first response to a human in its history. His curiosity was piqued, but he continued working, unaware that he was now twined in the fate of an empire. In the throne hall, the court sensed a subtle shift in the air, a hum that they could neither see nor explain. Their fear of the throne's judgment deepened. For centuries, it had rejected Cathara's best and brightest. And now somehow it had recognized something entirely alien, something human. The stage was set. The trial had failed as expected, but the throne had awakened, stirred by a presence no one could have anticipated. And somewhere in the shadows, a human janitor unknowingly held the key to a transformation that would shake the empire to its core.
The echoes of Prince Veyrek's failure still lingered in the throne hall. Court members whispered of curses, ominous portents, and ancient prophecies. Their eyes were fixed on the blood throne, that silent, pulsating seat of authority, which had rejected every heir in living memory. To them, the throne was a judge, an arbiter of destiny, but it had never reacted to a human, not until today. Far below the hall, in the labyrinthine maintenance tunnels, Jax, the human janitor, moved cautiously. The soft hum of the palace's machinery surrounded him like a living entity. He carried a small toolkit, methodically inspecting conduits and adjusting valves. In his mind, everything was procedural, routine maintenance, nothing more. But fate rarely adhered to routines. As he reached a junction of pipes and energy conduits, his hand slipped. A sharp shard of metal grazed his palm, and a drop of blood fell onto the floor. It fell unnoticed at first, glimmering faintly in the dim light. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint ripple spread outward, moving along the polished tiles toward the throne's subterranean network. The throne, dormant for centuries, sensed the alien DNA of a species it had never encountered. Its circuits stirred, thrumming in recognition. Jax recoiled instinctively. Pain flared in his palm, and he cursed under his breath, unaware of the monumental effect of a single drop of human blood. Around him, lights flickered. A low hum resonated through the tunnels, a vibration that seemed to penetrate bone and metal alike. The blood throne was awake. Above ground, the court paused mid-discussion, sensing something strange. Their attention shifted from the lifeless chamber where Veyrek had fallen to the throne itself. It pulsed faintly, an ethereal glow traveling along its surface. No heir had ever triggered such a reaction. Whispers grew into frantic chatter. Some nobles backed away, claiming it was an omen. Others demanded guards investigate immediately. Yet all were paralyzed by a strange, unidentifiable fear. Meanwhile, Jax's curiosity overcame his pain. He followed the pulse, tracing it along the conduits that led deeper into the heart of the throne hall. The air was charged with energy, and he could feel it buzzing against his skin. It was not threatening, not yet, but it was alive. He had no idea that he was walking into a place no human had ever entered, and that each step brought him closer to a destiny centuries in the making. The throne's recognition was not immediate understanding. It was a calculation, a scanning of variables. It assessed the human's qualities, adaptability, ingenuity, unpredictability, and resilience.
These traits were alien to the Cathara bloodlines, honed in a species that thrived on improvisation and quick thinking. Jax's simple act of being human, fallible, curious, inventive, was exactly what the throne had been waiting for. Back in the trial chambers, Veyrek's lifeless form was being removed by attendants. Panic was settling over the court like a thick fog. Some whispered that the trial was cursed beyond reason. Others muttered that perhaps the throne itself had grown sentient, judging not only bloodline, but worthiness in ways no heir could comprehend. And then came the subtle tremor. The throne's pulse grew stronger. It began to emit vibrations that resonated through the palace floor. The palace security was alerted immediately. They rushed toward the maintenance tunnels, lights flashing and alarms blaring. They expected a malfunction, a technical anomaly, perhaps even sabotage. Instead, they found Jax, crouched over the pipes, inspecting his cut. His blood was the source of the disturbance, yet he seemed oblivious, entirely human in his calm curiosity. A senior officer shouted, demanding the human step away. "Do you understand what you've done?" he barked. But Jax didn't move. He stared at the pulsing energy spreading through the conduits, fascinated rather than afraid. The throne, sensing no threat from the species, responded differently than it ever had to the heirs of Cathara. The energy it emitted was cautious, exploratory, as if testing the waters of a new consciousness. Suddenly, the throne projected an image, shimmering like a hologram but impossibly more vivid. It showed a vision of centuries past, rulers who had failed, trials that had destroyed their successors, and the empire's slow decay from inflexibility and arrogance. And then, for the first time, it projected forward, a vision of change, of a being entirely unexpected, human, who could alter the course of Cathara's history. The nobles in the throne hall gasped in unison, stepping back as a ripple of awe and fear swept over them. Jax didn't understand what he was seeing, but instinctively he reached out toward the projection. The energy flowed into his hand, warm and almost sentient. He felt a connection, as though the throne was speaking to him directly, not in words, but in understanding. Every problem he had ever solved, every improvisation he had made, every risk he had taken instinctively was recognized and amplified. He felt empowered, but not in the way of brute strength. The power was knowledge, insight, and perception. The court erupted into chaos. Some members attempted to seize the human, fearing his presence as a threat to their authority. Others fell to their knees, claiming to understand the throne's judgment intuitively. But then came the subtle tremor. The throne's pulse grew stronger. It began to emit vibrations that resonated through the palace floor. The palace security was alerted immediately. They rushed toward the maintenance tunnels, lights flashing and alarms blaring. They expected a malfunction, a technical anomaly, perhaps even sabotage. Instead, they found Jax, crouched over the pipes, inspecting his cut. His blood was the source of the disturbance, yet he seemed oblivious, entirely human in his calm curiosity. A senior officer shouted, demanding the human step away. "Do you understand what you've done?" he barked. But Jax didn't move. He stared at the pulsing energy spreading through the conduits, fascinated rather than afraid. The throne, sensing no threat from this species, responded differently than it ever had to the heirs of Cathara. The energy it emitted was cautious, exploratory, as if testing the waters of a new consciousness. Suddenly, the throne projected an image, shimmering like a hologram, but impossibly more vivid. It showed a vision of centuries past, rulers who had failed, trials that had destroyed their successors, and the empire's slow decay from inflexibility and arrogance. And then, for the first time, it projected forward, a vision of change, of a being entirely unexpected, human, who could alter the course of Cathara's history. The nobles in the throne hall gasped in unison, stepping back as a ripple of awe and fear swept over them. Jax didn't understand what he was seeing, but instinctively he reached out toward the projection. The energy flowed into his hand, warm and almost sentient. He felt a connection, as though the throne was speaking to him directly, not in words, but in understanding. The court erupted into chaos. Some members attempted to seize the human, fearing his presence as a threat to their authority. Others fell to their knees, claiming to understand the throne's judgment intuitively. But no one could predict what would happen next. Every attempt to interfere with Jax was met with subtle yet undeniable resistance. Doors that locked, energy barriers that flickered in response, the throne itself subtly manipulating the environment. It had chosen, and it was protecting its choice. For the first time in recorded history, a human had entered the sphere of the Blood Throne. The ancient rituals, the centuries of preparation, the training of countless heirs, all had culminated in this moment of unpredictability. Jax, an ordinary janitor, stood at the center of an empire's fate. The throne's pulse pulsed stronger, now surrounding him in a soft light. His senses expanded. He could feel the palace around him in minute detail, sense the flow of energy through the walls, and even perceive the emotional states of those above him. Fear, awe, curiosity, and greed, all were tangible. He realized instinctively that he was no longer just a bystander. He had become the variable the throne had been waiting for, the anomaly that could awaken its full potential. And so the stage was set. The court, stunned and uncertain, watched as an ordinary human became something extraordinary, not through strength, not through cunning, but simply by being human. The Blood Throne had awakened, and the empire, rigid and self-assured for centuries, had just glimpsed the first spark of an impossible future. Jax's mind raced. He had no desire for power, no plan for empire, yet he understood one thing clearly. The throne had chosen him. The choice was irrevocable. Every step he took now would be watched, measured.
The throne hall of Korthal had never been so silent. Even the flickering lights seemed to hold their breath. The nobles, guards, and attendants clustered near the periphery, their eyes wide with disbelief, fear, and awe. For centuries, the Blood Throne had rejected every heir, every attempt at succession. It had never responded to outsiders, let alone a human. Yet now, pulsating energy radiated from the throne, its form shimmering with an almost organic fluidity. At the center of this storm stood Jax, the human janitor. Sweat beaded on his brow, not from exertion, but from the weight of incomprehensible attention. He could feel the throne's energy brushing against his mind, probing, measuring, and assessing. It was not threatening, it was curious, intelligent, and deliberate. Unlike the alien heirs who had trained within rigid structures their entire lives, Jax's mind was unprepared for the throne's connection, but his adaptability, quick thinking, and intuition allowed him to engage with it instinctively. Then it spoke, not in words as humans understood them, but as a resonance, deep and all-encompassing, vibrating directly in his mind. Why do you survive where others fail? The voice was neither male nor female, neither alien nor human. It was a presence, ancient yet alive, testing him. Jax swallowed hard. He had never faced judgment on this scale before. I don't know, he thought. I'm just me. The throne pulsed in response, as if considering his answer. You are not of this lineage. You carry no claim, yet you exist here, and your presence has awakened me. Why? Jax's mind raced. He didn't understand why he was the focus, why a throne of the alien empire, so intricate, so lethal, had chosen to respond to him. But instinctively, he thought of every lesson humans had learned over millennia: observation, improvisation, empathy, and courage. I adapt. I survive. I see what others overlook.
He projected to the throne, uncertain if it could comprehend human thought. The energy around him shimmered brighter. For the first time, the Blood Throne acknowledged that survival and worth were not measured by brute strength or adherence to tradition, but by qualities alien to Cathara itself: adaptability, resilience, and ingenuity. The throne's pulse quickened, like the heartbeat of a creature awakening after centuries of dormancy. From the galleries, the court watched in horror and fascination. Many fell to their knees, claiming that this human was cursed or blessed, depending on their allegiance. The senior scholars and advisors whispered furiously among themselves, trying to rationalize what they saw. The throne had never acted outside the trial's parameters, and yet here it was, recognizing a being who had not even intended to participate. The palace security rushed forward, attempting to restrain Jax, but the throne responded before they could act. Doors slammed shut, energy barriers flickered into life, and mechanical mechanisms subtly shifted to block interference. Jax could feel the throne's energy guiding him, not physically, but strategically. Every action by the court or guards was anticipated and countered, not through brute force, but through subtle control of the environment. The throne was protecting him, silently declaring that it had chosen. Jax took a cautious step forward. His curiosity now overrode his fear. He looked at the throne and projected a thought. "What do you want from me?" The throne's reply was immediate, resonating through his mind like a symphony of intent. "I seek a being capable of growth, insight, and creation beyond the constraints of your species' understanding. The heirs of Cathara have failed because they are bound by tradition, by arrogance, by predictability. You, human, possess what they lack." Shock rippled through the court. To hear the throne speak intelligibly, deliberately, was unprecedented. Whispers became shouts. Some nobles swore the human must be an impostor, a spy, or a heretic. Others believed he was chosen by the throne itself, a sign of a new order. Factions began forming immediately. Those who sought to exploit Jax, those who wanted to destroy him, and those who simply wished to understand what the throne now demanded. Jax felt a rush of exhilaration, tempered by the weight of responsibility. He was still a janitor, untrained in politics, diplomacy, or warfare. Yet the throne's connection gave him insight into the palace, its systems, and even alien strategy. He could sense motives, anticipate moves, and detect weaknesses, not through brute force, but through observation, pattern recognition, and human ingenuity. The throne continued, revealing knowledge that no heir had ever accessed. It showed him schematics of the palace, energy flows, historical data, and even predictions of how different political factions would react to his emergence. Yet it did not control him. It offered guidance, insight, and assessment. The choice remained his. In the throne hall, dissent flared. Some nobles attempted to approach him aggressively, but each move was subtly blocked by environmental shifts orchestrated by the throne. Tiles shifted, doors closed, air currents subtly redirected. The human was untouchable, not by force, but by strategy, by an awareness that the throne itself provided. The court realized with growing fear that they were no longer dealing with a human. They were dealing with a new variable, one that the throne itself had endorsed. Jax's mind raced. He knew he had to act carefully. Every movement, every decision could influence the Empire's future. The throne's choice was unprecedented. He was now the focus of centuries of expectation, failure, and judgment. He did not crave power, but he understood that refusal was no longer an option. The throne had awakened him to a role he had never imagined, and the consequences of ignoring it could be catastrophic. He projected a thought, steadying himself. "I will learn. I will adapt. I will not fail you or this empire." The throne pulsed in acknowledgement. Its energy expanded, filling the chamber, vibrating through the very walls of the palace. Jax could feel the intelligence within it, an entity, ancient, deliberate, and patient, recognizing the beginning of a new era. The Blood Throne had waited centuries for someone capable of reshaping its empire, and it had found that being in a human janitor, unassuming, overlooked, and underestimated. In the galleries, the nobles' reactions crystallized. Some knelt, swearing fealty, recognizing that resistance was futile. Others scowled, plotting. A few simply stared, eyes wide, unable to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The human, once invisible, was now central to the empire's destiny. And somewhere deep inside the throne, the calculation was simple and terrifyingly precise. This human, flawed and unpredictable, possessed qualities no heir of Cathara ever had: adaptability, ingenuity, empathy, courage. These were traits that could not be simulated, taught, or forced. They had to be innate. The throne had found its successor, not in the bloodline it had expected, but in a species it had never before considered. Jax took a deep breath, feeling the weight of centuries of expectation settle on his shoulders. He did not yet understand the full scope of what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: the Blood Throne had awakened, and the Empire would never be the same. For the first time in recorded history, a human had entered the sphere of the Blood Throne, not as a servant, not as a spectator, but as its chosen. And the age of the human throne was about to begin.
The throne had awakened, and with it, the empire had shifted on its axis. Whispers still hummed through the throne hall, but they were no longer just about curses or failures. They were about a human. Jax, a simple janitor, now stood at the center of centuries of expectation, his mind brimming with possibilities he had never imagined. For the first time, the palace's intricate systems and alien technologies were not merely a backdrop. They were tools, instruments of strategy, and puzzle pieces waiting for a human touch. Jax began cautiously. He explored the palace's maintenance tunnels, noting energy conduits, hidden control panels, and mechanical systems that had long been taken for granted by the court. His mind processed patterns that the aliens could not see: the subtle oscillations of power flows, the minute timing discrepancies in security protocols, the inefficiencies in automated defense mechanisms. To the Cathara, these were minor details, insignificant. To a human, they were opportunities. The first test of his ingenuity came unexpectedly. A group of palace advisors, fearful of the human's connection to the throne, attempted a covert strike. They had engineered an artificial collapse in the tunnels, intending to bury Jax beneath tons of reinforced alloy and concrete. But Jax, sensing subtle changes in air pressure and vibrations through the floors, reacted instinctively. Using a nearby wrench and a loose support beam, he redirected the collapsing structure just enough to create a safe passage. The advisor's plan failed spectacularly, not through combat prowess, but through observation, quick thinking, and improvisation. Word of his survival spread quickly. Some nobles began to see the potential in a human who could navigate the palace's intricate systems and outmaneuver threats that elite heirs could not. Others panicked, fearing that the throne had chosen someone entirely unpredictable, someone who could not be controlled. Security patrols became hesitant, unsure how to confront a being protected by forces they did not understand. The throne itself seemed to anticipate danger, suddenly shifting pathways, adjusting energy fields, and rerouting hazards. It was not controlling Jax, it was guiding him. Jax's next move was not born of ambition, but curiosity. He began experimenting with alien technology, devices that scholars had studied for decades but could not fully comprehend.
Energy converters, plasma relays, memory matrices, all were intuitive to him in ways the Cathara could not grasp. He manipulated systems not with brute force, but by understanding how they interacted, noticing minute cues in their responses. His human perspective, flexible, adaptive, and unconstrained by rigid rules, turned these ancient devices into extensions of his will. The throne watched, assessing, approving, subtly amplifying his efforts. It recognized in him the qualities it had sought for centuries: creativity, resilience, and lateral thinking. These were traits alien heirs lacked, bound as they were by tradition and a rigid sense of protocol. Jax did not understand the full scope of his advantage, but he felt it. The pulse of the throne, the connection to the palace, the subtle reinforcement of his instincts. Attempts on his life continued, each more elaborate than the last. Assassin drones, genetically engineered predators, and clandestine traps were deployed, yet each attempt failed because Jax approached them differently than any heir ever could. Where an alien would confront force with force, Jax improvised. He rerouted power to create temporary barriers, used maintenance drones to block attacks, and turned the palace's mechanical systems against those who sought to harm him. Every success was met with the throne's quiet approval, a recognition of the uniquely human capacity to adapt under pressure. Beyond survival, Jax began to understand the political dynamics of the court. Factions vied for control, some attempting to bribe, threaten, or deceive him. Humans, unlike Cathara nobles, could read not only actions but intent, interpreting micro-expressions, inconsistencies, and subtle cues in conversation. Jax leveraged these insights, subtly manipulating outcomes without overt confrontation. He had no desire to dominate. His goal was simple: to survive, learn, and understand. But survival itself became a form of influence. The court slowly realized that the human was not just enduring. The human was shaping the palace according to logic and creativity the Cathara could not replicate. The throne itself responded to this human ingenuity. Ancient systems, dormant for centuries, were now accessible. Holographic archives of the empire, strategic records, and even defensive blueprints became tools in Jax's hands. He could anticipate political maneuvers, identify structural weaknesses, and predict the consequences of decisions with astonishing accuracy. Yet he remained humble, guided by instinct rather than ambition, by curiosity rather than desire for power. This restraint combined with ingenuity made him even more effective, a combination alien heirs could not fathom. One pivotal moment came when a faction of nobles attempted to seize control of a critical energy node powering the palace. The node's failure could have destabilized the entire throne hall, risking not only Jax's life, but also the throne itself. Observing the approaching saboteurs, Jax improvised a solution using a combination of old maintenance tools, redirected energy flows, and a temporary magnetic field. The saboteurs were trapped in a containment corridor, unable to advance or retreat, while the throne absorbed the incident's data, integrating it into its awareness of human problem-solving. By the end of the week, the palace had transformed subtly but irreversibly. Security protocols, previously static and predictable, now responded dynamically, guided by the presence of a human mind. Court factions, once arrogant and complacent, now approached cautiously, aware that a single misstep could backfire in ways they could not predict. And Jax, the janitor, the overlooked human, was at the center of it all, alive, unbroken, and growing more confident in his connection to the throne. For the first time, the Cathara began to understand the implications of human adaptability. Their most trusted heirs had perished, predictable in their rigidity. Humans, however, thrived in chaos, found solutions where none seemed possible, and leveraged constraints as opportunities.
Jax's ingenuity was not just a survival mechanism, it was a demonstration of the unquantifiable power of humanity. And so the stage was set for the next chapter of the Empire's history. The Blood Throne had awakened, and it had chosen a human not to dominate through force, but to transform through intellect, adaptability, and resilience. The court, once the pinnacle of alien arrogance, now realized that the unlikeliest candidate, the Janitor, was rewriting the rules. Every challenge, every threat, and every political maneuver would now be measured against the ingenuity of a human, a being whose strength the Cathara could not anticipate or fully comprehend. The age of the human throne had begun, and with it the first true test of what a human could accomplish in a galaxy that had never valued them. And somewhere deep within the throne, ancient circuits and organic sensors pulsed with awareness, recording every act, every decision, and every human instinct. The Empire would soon learn that survival, intelligence, and adaptability were far more dangerous and far more valuable than pure strength or heritage.
Korthal, the capital of the Cathara Empire, was no longer the same. Whispers of a human awakened by the Blood Throne had spread beyond the palace halls, into the council chambers, guilds, and even the outer colonies. The air buzzed with suspicion and fear. For centuries, the Empire had thrived on order, hierarchy, and predictability, but that order had been shattered by one unremarkable human janitor. Jax, once invisible, had become the epicenter of an unprecedented storm. The opposition did not act immediately, choosing instead to observe. The Empire's elite understood that a direct strike on someone protected by the throne could have disastrous consequences. Instead, conspiracies formed in shadows, hidden alliances, clandestine communications, and careful manipulations designed to undermine Jax without overtly confronting him. Spies were deployed, ambushes planned, and subversive sabotage became the preferred tactic of those unwilling to accept the unthinkable, a human chosen by the Blood Throne. Jax, aware of the palace's dangers, but not fully of the human versus Empire dynamics, relied on the throne's guidance. His connection allowed him to anticipate threats subtly. He noticed minute fluctuations in energy conduits, anomalies in patrol patterns, and whispers of scheming nobles. Unlike the heirs of Cathara, whose confidence often blinded them to danger, Jax's instincts were honed for survival in unpredictable circumstances. His human intuition became his greatest weapon. The first major assassination attempt occurred during a routine inspection of the palace's energy matrix. A faction of nobles had rigged a plasma relay to overload, intending to fry Jax along with the surrounding maintenance tunnels. But Jax noticed a faint shimmering in the conduits, an anomaly the aliens overlooked. Acting quickly, he redirected the energy, channeling it into a dormant system that stabilized the overload. The would-be assassin's plan backfired spectacularly. A surge of plasma activated their own devices, forcing them into hasty retreat and leaving the palace completely unharmed. The incident sparked panic among the conspirators. They realized that the human was not only surviving, but actively countering their plans using ingenuity, observation, and unconventional thinking. Where they expected fear and hesitation, they found creativity and adaptability, a pattern unfamiliar to Cathara elites. Jax's survival was no longer a coincidence. It was a demonstration of uniquely human traits amplified by the throne's guidance. Beyond physical survival, Jax began to influence the political landscape. Nobles who had once dismissed him now sought alliances, offering fealty, insight, and resources. Some hoped to learn from him, others hoped to manipulate him. Jax navigated these interactions cautiously. His understanding of alien psychology, subtle, complex, and often ritualistic, allowed him to manipulate outcomes without overt confrontation. In essence, he was changing the rules of governance from the inside, simply by existing and thinking differently. The throne's role in these events was subtle but crucial. It amplified Jax's ability to perceive hidden threats, predicted likely outcomes of political maneuvers, and provided insight into the Empire's ancient technologies. Jax could anticipate ambushes, intercept sabotage attempts, and negotiate with rival factions with an uncanny precision. Yet the throne did not act on his behalf. It offered knowledge, guidance, and situational awareness. The actions remained his, human and unpredictable. As weeks passed, conspiracies grew bolder. A group of disgruntled nobles attempted a coordinated strike to sever the palace's energy core, hoping to cut off Jax's connection to the throne. They deployed a sophisticated network of drones and bioengineered predators, each programmed to hunt and eliminate intruders with lethal efficiency. This time the threat was complex, multifaceted, and calculated. Even for a human, the challenge was immense. Jax responded in ways no Cathara could anticipate. Using his deep understanding of cause and effect, he turned the palace's architecture against the attackers. Drones were rerouted into containment chambers. Predators were lured into traps using improvised signals and environmental manipulations. Energy flows were redirected to create barriers, isolating the threat. Each step was a demonstration of human creativity, problem-solving not constrained by tradition, logic, or fear. The conspirators' elaborate plan collapsed under the weight of unpredictability. Victory came with a cost. Jax began to realize the political stakes he now faced. The court would never accept a human by conventional means. Some would adapt, some would resist, and some would seek revenge. Survival alone would not be enough. He needed to reshape the Empire's structure to prevent endless cycles of betrayal and assassination. His ingenuity had kept him alive, but it was also revealing him as a force capable of changing everything. Amid this chaos, Jax began to implement subtle reforms. He improved the palace's infrastructure, streamlined energy distribution, and enhanced security measures, not to assert power, but to create stability. His interventions were guided by observation, intuition, and the throne's insights. The palace became a dynamic system, responsive to threats and anomalies, no longer static and predictable. The Cathara, long accustomed to rigid hierarchies, struggled to comprehend this new environment. Yet even as he adapted, Jax maintained humility. He did not seek to dominate or conquer. He sought understanding and survival. This too was uniquely human, the ability to balance curiosity with caution, ambition with restraint. Every success reinforced the throne's confidence in him. Every failure became a lesson rather than a catastrophe. The Empire, long stagnant under rigid traditions, was beginning to evolve, not because of force, but because of human ingenuity applied in ways no alien had ever imagined. The conspiracies, far from quelling the human threat, only highlighted the unquantifiable value of human adaptability. Every attempt to harm or control him backfired, revealing vulnerabilities in Cathara systems and forcing the palace to adapt. The throne's centuries of design, meant to test heirs, now worked in concert with the human's instincts. The combination was unprecedented, a human mind connected to an ancient sentient system, capable of anticipating and countering threats beyond conventional understanding. By the end of the cycle, the court had no choice but to acknowledge the unthinkable. The Janitor was not merely surviving, he was reshaping the Empire. His ingenuity, adaptability, and moral instinct were proving superior to centuries of training, tradition, and hereditary privilege. The Cathara realized, perhaps for the first time, that their civilization had underestimated the potential of an entirely alien species, humanity. The shadows of conspiracy had revealed more than threats. They had illuminated human potential. Jax, still modest and cautious, understood that his path was only beginning. The throne had awakened him, the Empire had noticed, and the consequences of this recognition would ripple through every chamber, council, and star system connected to Cathara. The age of the human throne was no longer theoretical, it was underway. And Jax, the janitor who had cut his hand on a shard of metal, was its unassuming catalyst.
The Blood Throne had awakened, and the Empire of Cathara teetered between awe and panic. Within the throne hall, whispers of rebellion, intrigue, and prophecy mingled with the hum of ancient machinery. Jax, the human janitor turned unexpected steward of the throne, now faced the greatest challenge of his life, not merely surviving, but transforming an empire that had grown rigid over millennia. He began quietly, observing the court and palace with the same meticulous attention he had used to navigate maintenance tunnels and avoid assassination attempts. The Cathara were brilliant, yes, but bound by traditions and ceremonial rigidity. Decisions were slow, politics convoluted, and succession weighed down by hierarchy rather than competence. Jax realized that the throne's choice was not just about survival, it was about evolution. Humanity had thrived for millennia by adapting, innovating, and challenging norms. If the Cathara were to endure, they needed the same flexibility. The first reform was simple but profound: a meritocratic council. Jax proposed that positions of influence be granted not by lineage, but by capability, insight, and integrity. At first, the nobles laughed, dismissing him as an overambitious human. But the Blood Throne pulsed in resonance with Jax's proposal, subtly reinforcing his authority. The court paused, hesitant. Every attempt at dissent seemed to meet invisible resistance. Energy fields subtly redirected movements, doors closed at inconvenient times, and mechanical guardians intercepted the most aggressive nobles. It was as though the palace itself had aligned with him. Using the throne's guidance, Jax demonstrated the effectiveness of meritocracy in real time. He invited a group of engineers, previously overlooked due to low status, to optimize the palace's energy network. Within hours, they identified inefficiencies the court had ignored for decades. Power output increased, system latency decreased, and emergency protocols became adaptive rather than static. The evidence was undeniable. Decisions made by capable minds, regardless of status, yielded results superior to centuries of hereditary governance. Meanwhile, Jax worked to stabilize the palace's security systems. Assassination attempts had become frequent, sophisticated, and dangerous. Rather than relying solely on brute force, he employed observation, prediction, and improvisation, human traits alien to the Cathara. Patrols were rerouted based on behavioral analysis, entry points reinforced where schemers were most likely to strike, and automated defenses integrated with palace sensors to anticipate threats before they occurred. Each action demonstrated that humans could not only survive, but thrive in environments designed to destroy them. Political factions began to fracture under the pressure. Those who sought to manipulate or eliminate Jax were outmaneuvered, either by their own miscalculations or by his strategic foresight. Others, inspired or fearful, began pledging loyalty, not blindly, but in recognition of competence and vision. The palace was no longer merely a seat of hereditary power. It had become a living system of adaptation, strategy, and insight. Jax had transformed it without forcing authority, without overt domination, and without undermining the moral foundations that humans valued. The empire had begun to evolve, not because of alien tradition, but because a human had demonstrated the unquantifiable strength of ingenuity, adaptability, and ethical leadership. The age of the human throne had arrived in full force. Korthal, the Empire, and the Blood Throne itself had begun a transformation centuries in the making,
catalyzed by a human who had merely been doing his job. The court, the palace, and the empire would never be the same. And somewhere deep within the throne, energy pulsed with awareness, recording every decision, every act of ingenuity, every moral choice. Jax was no longer merely a janitor. He was the architect of the Empire's next era.
The throne hall of Korthal had changed forever. Where once the air had carried whispers of fear and rigid tradition, now it thrummed with energy, adaptation, and the pulse of a new order. Jax, the human janitor who had accidentally awakened the Blood Throne, now stood at the center of an empire that had once laughed at his kind. He was no longer invisible, no longer underestimated. He was the fulcrum upon which the empire's destiny balanced. The final test came not from the throne or the court, but from history itself. The Kthara had faced countless crises, but none had encountered a variable as unpredictable as a human. Across the empire, rival species, observing the unprecedented upheaval, began to maneuver, sensing vulnerability in the alien leadership. Traders, colonists, and allied governors watched closely. The Blood Throne, while sentient, had never contended with an empire-wide external threat coupled with internal transformation. Jax understood instinctively that his next challenge would not merely test survival, but vision, strategy, and adaptability on a scale far beyond the palace walls. The court, still adjusting to the notion of a human-led meritocracy, was fracturing. A coalition of traditionalists, outraged by the loss of hereditary privilege, conspired openly for the first time. They were clever, well-resourced, and ruthless. Their plan: seize control of the throne hall during a critical council meeting, eliminate Jax, and reinstall a puppet heir who would obey Kthara tradition unquestioningly. Jax had anticipated this. Using the throne's guidance, he transformed the palace into a living labyrinth of defense, subtly integrating predictive energy barriers, automated contingencies, and environmental controls that could isolate threats without harming innocents. Where the Kthara relied on rigid patrols and brute enforcement, Jax leveraged human ingenuity, observation, improvisation, and the ability to anticipate actions beyond algorithmic prediction. The conspirators struck at dusk. Cloaked in shadows, they infiltrated corridors with precision, believing the humans' oversight would fail. But Jax had anticipated each approach. Hallways subtly shifted, lights dimmed to reveal traps, and energy fields diverted them into containment zones. Their drones malfunctioned when exposed to unconventional interference patterns Jax introduced using maintenance conduits and redirected power flows. One by one, the conspirators' efforts unraveled, not through strength, but through adaptive thinking that no Kthara heir had ever displayed. The throne pulsed, resonating with the humans' ingenuity. It did not act to eliminate the threat. It guided, assessed, and amplified Jax's perception, allowing him to respond dynamically. Every obstacle became an opportunity, every risk a lesson. The palace itself seemed to bend around him, alive not with fear, but with a recognition of human potential. When the final conspirator, a high-ranking noble who had once mocked Jax's presence, attempted a direct attack, Jax confronted him with clarity and control. Words, gestures, and calculated movement allowed him to neutralize the threat without bloodshed. The noble, disarmed and humiliated, was forced to kneel, acknowledging the human's authority. Across the court, awe replaced dissent. For the first time, humans and Kthara alike could see that survival alone was insufficient. Leadership required ingenuity, ethics, and the ability to transform crisis into opportunity. The Blood Throne, sensing the humans' mastery over both palace and court, projected its final challenge, not a trial of survival, but a vision of the Empire's future. It showed Jax multiple paths: maintain the current order, allow tradition to persist while subtly influencing events, or embrace a complete transformation, merging human adaptability with Kthara infrastructure to create an empire capable of evolving indefinitely. Jax considered each option. Maintaining the status quo would preserve life, but perpetuate stagnation.
Influencing from the shadows would provide incremental improvements, but leave the empire vulnerable to external threats. Transformation, though fraught with risk, offered resilience, adaptability, and the chance to break centuries of rigidity. His choice was clear. Humanity had never thrived by maintaining stasis. Survival depended on evolution. He reached out, both mentally and physically, connecting with the throne's energy. We will change. Not for power, not for dominance, but for survival and growth. Together, humans and Kthara will build something stronger than tradition, stronger than fear. The throne responded with a pulse that resonated throughout the palace and into the surrounding city. Lights shimmered, walls vibrated, and ancient systems reconfigured themselves. Energy flows optimized. Archives previously inaccessible were unlocked. The palace itself acknowledged the transformation. Jax was no longer merely the human at the center. He was the catalyst for an empire reborn. Across Korthal, reactions were immediate and varied. Allies rallied to his side, inspired by the evidence of human ingenuity and the tangible improvements in governance and security. Traditionalists, though initially resistant, were forced to adapt or be marginalized. Colonies and allied species began to take notice. A human had survived, adapted, and thrived where Kthara heirs had failed. The implications rippled outward, redefining interstellar politics. Jax began implementing practical reforms on a grand scale. Trade networks were decentralized, but coordinated for efficiency. Defense grids became adaptive rather than rigid, capable of responding to unpredictable threats. Merit-based councils were established across colonies, incorporating both humans and Kthara in positions of strategic influence. Education, previously reserved for elite heirs, became accessible to talented individuals regardless of birth. Every reform reflected a uniquely human philosophy: adaptability, creativity, and ethical responsibility above all. The court, once steeped in fear and hierarchy, began to see the value of these changes. Nobles learned to act not through arrogance or entitlement, but through competence and insight. The palace itself, guided by the throne and human leadership, became a model of dynamic governance. For the first time, Kthara citizens witnessed the power of human potential applied not through force or conquest, but through observation, analysis, and innovation. Finally, the Blood Throne, ancient and enigmatic, acknowledged the transformation fully. Its energy stabilized around Jax, confirming the selection it had made centuries ago. The throne's recognition was not just of survival or even leadership. It was an acknowledgement that humanity's qualities were now integral to the Empire's future. Where Kthara bloodlines had failed, human adaptability had succeeded. As the sun set over Korthal, casting long shadows across the palace, Jax stood in the throne hall, not as a janitor, not as an interloper, but as the first human to fully awaken the Blood Throne. The Empire's destiny had shifted irreversibly. He had survived, he had innovated, and he had inspired change. Humanity had proven unequivocally that its strengths, ingenuity, adaptability, and ethical insight were forces the galaxy could no longer ignore. And so, the age of the human throne began. The Empire would endure not through rigidity or fear, but through the very traits that allowed a single human janitor to awaken a power that had rejected countless heirs. Humanity had stepped into its first true role among the stars, not as servants or outsiders, but as catalysts of change, architects of survival, and keepers of the Blood Throne's legacy.